The reaction to the Pittsburgh Steelers 2026 draft class is already splitting the fan base, but when you really dig into what happened, the full picture starts to look a lot more calculated than chaotic. Let's start with the first round decision, because that's where everything changed. Instead of going in the direction many expected, Pittsburgh selected offensive tackle Max Ahanakor out of Arizona State, and that choice came with context that matters. There was uncertainty surrounding the quarterback situation, especially with the delayed decision from Aaron Rodgers, and that clearly influenced how the front office approached value and long-term roster construction. Max Ahanakor is not your typical polished plug-and-play prospect, and that's exactly why this pick is being misunderstood. This is a player who only started playing football recently, didn't even see his first game action until 2022, and yet already has 31 starts under his belt. At 321 pounds with nearly 34-inch arms and impressive athleticism, including sub 5.0 speed, what you're looking at is a rare developmental profile. This is the kind of prospect offensive line coaches dream about molding. And when you turn on the tape, especially against elite competition like David Bailey, a top pass rusher taken second overall, you see flashes of dominance that you simply cannot teach. Now here's where things get interesting. The Steelers already have recent first-round investments at tackle, including Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu. So naturally, fans are asking, where does Max Ahanakor fit? The answer is layered. In the short term, he doesn't have to start immediately. There's flexibility, especially with Dylan Cook coming off a strong season and proving he can hold his own. But long term, the vision is clear. Max Ahanakor has the ceiling to become a cornerstone tackle for the next decade. That's the gamble, and it's one rooted in upside, not immediate need. What's really clouding judgment here is the optics. The situation involving the Eagles trading up and the perception that Pittsburgh lost control of the board created frustration. But that moment doesn't define the player. If anything, it distracted from what could end up being one of the smartest long-term investments in this class. Because if Honor develops the way the Steelers believe he can, this narrative flips completely. And that brings us to the bigger philosophical question behind this pick. Are the Steelers building for immediate impact, or are they finally committing to sustained dominance in the trenches? Because when you stack Max Ahanakor alongside recent additions to the offensive line, you start to see a unit being built with intention, size, and athleticism that could define this team's identity moving forward. So while the debate continues and opinions remain divided, the reality is this: Pittsburgh didn't just draft a player, they drafted a projection. And projections take time. The real judgment on this pick won't come this season. It'll come in the years ahead when we see whether Max Ahanakor becomes that bookend tackle anchoring the line. But let's bring it back to you. Based on everything you've seen and heard, do you believe Ahanakor has what it takes to become a long-term cornerstone for this team? Or do you think the Steelers took too big of a risk in round one? The conversation shifts quickly when you move beyond the first round, because this is where the Pittsburgh Steelers may have quietly made one of the most important decisions of their entire draft, and it revolves around the quarterback position. Taking Drew Aller in the third round doesn't just add depth, it reveals how the organization is thinking about the future under center. And if you connect the dots, it tells you a lot about how confident they really are in the current situation. Right now, the quarterback room has more questions than answers. The team chose not to make a significant move in free agency, clearly waiting on clarity regarding Aaron Rodgers. That decision alone created a ripple effect across the entire draft strategy, because instead of forcing a pick early, the front office stayed patient and found value in Aller, a player who might not be ready today but could become something much bigger down the line. And this is where the pick starts to make more sense the deeper you analyze it. Aller comes in with prototypical size, a powerful arm, and the kind of raw traits that teams are always willing to bet on. Yes, he's unrefined. Yes, there are concerns about mechanics, consistency, and overall polish. But we've seen this story before in the NFL. Quarterbacks who entered the league labeled as projects have developed into elite players when placed in the right environment. What makes this situation different and potentially ideal is the setup around him. Aller is not being thrown into chaos. He's walking into a roster that is already built to compete. There's a strong supporting cast, a solid offensive line that continues to be reinforced, and a coaching staff that understands how how to develop talent. More importantly, he won't be forced onto the field before he's ready. That alone dramatically increases his chances of success. Now think about the potential scenario here. If Rodgers does return, Aller gets the opportunity to sit, observe, and learn from one of the most accomplished quarterbacks in league history. That kind of mentorship is invaluable, especially for a player who needs time to refine his fundamentals. It allows him to focus on improving footwork, decision-making, and reading defenses without the pressure of immediate performance. But even if that scenario doesn't fully materialize, the Steelers have still insulated themselves. They didn't spend a first-round pick. They didn't mortgage the future. Instead, they used a third-round selection to take a calculated swing on upside. And in today's NFL, that's exactly how you should approach the quarterback position when you're not in a position to grab a top-tier prospect. The more you zoom out, the clearer the strategy becomes. This wasn't about solving the quarterback position overnight. It was about creating optionality. It was about giving the organization a path forward no matter how the current situation unfolds. And if Aller hits, even if it takes 2 or 3 years, this could end up being one of the most valuable picks in the entire class. Beyond the quarterback, the rest of the draft shows a consistent pattern, addressing needs without completely abandoning value. Adding a versatile weapon like Jeremy Bernard gives the offense another dimension, especially in a system that can maximize yards after the catch. Bringing in depth at cornerback with players like Dallin Everett strengthens a secondary that already has young talent, and reinforcing the offensive line again with Jennings Dunker continues to build what could become a defining strength of this team. There's also an emphasis on special teams and versatility, with players like Caden Legion expected to contribute immediately as a return specialist while potentially offering more as a receiver. Even hybrid pieces like a fullback tight end option add layers to how this offense can operate. When you stack all of these moves together, it doesn't feel random, it feels coordinated. So when you look back at the overall grade, a solid B, maybe even a B+ depending on how you value upside, you start to understand why it landed there. This wasn't a flashy headline-grabbing draft. It didn't chase instant gratification. Instead, it focused on building a foundation, taking calculated risks, and positioning the team for both the present and the future. And that's really what this entire class comes down to. It's not about what these players will do in week 1. It's about what they could become by year 2, year 3, and beyond. Because if even a few of these high upside bets pay off, we could be looking at a draft that ages extremely well. And this is where everything comes together, because when you step back and look at the full picture, the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't just have a decent draft. They executed a plan that only really makes sense if you're thinking 2 or 3 years ahead instead of reacting to the moment. That's why the grade sits in that B to B+ range. It reflects a class that may not dominate headlines today, but has the structure to age far better than people expect. Go back to the offensive line for a second, because this might quietly be the most important storyline of the entire class. You're adding Max Ahanakor and Jennings Dunker to a group that already includes recent high investment players, and suddenly you're looking at a unit that could become one of the most physical and athletic lines in football. That's not accidental. That's identity building. That's a front office committing to controlling games at the line of scrimmage, protecting whoever ends up at quarterback, and reestablishing a brand of football that has historically defined this franchise. And when you pair that with the skill position additions, you start to see how this offense could evolve. Jeremy Bernard isn't just another receiver. He's a piece that can be moved around, used creatively, and relied upon in key situations. In an offense that may lean on quick decisions and yards after the catch, having a player like that behind established targets creates balance. It gives flexibility. It makes life easier for a quarterback, especially a young one. Defensively, the additions may not jump off the screen, but they matter. Depth at cornerback, rotational versatility, and competition across the roster are all part of building a team that can sustain success over a full season. The Steelers didn't chase splash. They added layers. And in a long NFL season, those layers are often what separate good teams from great ones. Special teams also got attention, and that's something that often gets overlooked until it costs games. Caden Legion has the potential to make an immediate impact as a returner, flipping field position and adding hidden yardage. Those are the kinds of details that don't dominate draft coverage, but absolutely show up on Sundays. So when people say this class feels underwhelming, what they're really reacting to is the lack of instant star power. But not every successful draft looks explosive on day one. Some of them are built on projection, development, and patience. And that's exactly what this class represents. The real swing pieces are obvious. Maxie Honor on the offensive line, Drew Aller at quarterback. If those two hit, everything changes. The narrative shifts from solid but unspectacular to this is the class that set the foundation for the next era of Steelers football. And that's why the risk makes sense, because the payoff, if it happens, is massive. At the same time, the floor of this class feels relatively stable. You've added players who can contribute in roles, who can develop into starters, and who strengthen the roster even if they don't become superstars. That balance between floor and ceiling is what keeps the overall evaluation in a strong range. And maybe that's the most important takeaway here. This wasn't a desperate draft. It wasn't reactionary. It was controlled. It was measured. And it was built around a vision that prioritizes long-term competitiveness over short-term noise. Now, the only thing left is to see how it plays out on the field, because development isn't guaranteed. Projection doesn't always become production. But if this front office evaluated correctly, if the coaching staff maximizes these players, and if the quarterback situation stabilizes the way they expect, this could quietly become one of the more important drafts in recent franchise history. So now it's on you. Drop your final grade for this class and be honest. Are you buying into this long-term vision, or do you still feel like the Steelers missed an opportunity to make a bigger immediate impact? Because here's the reality that not enough people are talking about. The Pittsburgh Steelers didn't just draft players, they set a timeline. And whether fans realize it or not, this entire class is tied to what happens next at quarterback and how quickly this roster can transition from competitive to truly dangerous. Think about the pressure points. If the offensive line develops the way they're projecting, this offense instantly becomes more stable. Protection improves, the run game becomes more consistent, and suddenly whoever is under center is operating in a much cleaner environment. That alone can change the trajectory of a season. And it's not just about this year. It's about building a system where a young quarterback like Drew Aller could step in later and not be overwhelmed from day one. But that's where the risk still lingers. Because while the structure is being built correctly, the timeline isn't guaranteed to align perfectly. Offensive linemen take time. Raw quarterbacks take even longer. And in a division as competitive as the AFC North, patience can be tested very quickly. Fans don't want to wait 3 years to see results. They want to see progress now. And yet, if you look closely, there are pathways for both. This team didn't ignore the present. There are players in this class who can contribute right away in specific roles. There's depth being added in key areas. There are pieces that can rotate in, make plays, and support the core of the roster. So while the ceiling of this class is tied to long-term development, the floor still has immediate value. That balance is what makes this draft so fascinating. It's walking a line between two timelines, competing now while quietly preparing for what comes next. And not every team manages to do that effectively. Some go all in on the future and regress in the present. Others chase immediate needs and end up stuck in the middle long-term. The Steelers are trying to avoid both traps at the same time. Now it all circles back to one central question. Did they get the evaluations right? Because if they did, everything we're talking about starts to fall into place. The offensive line becomes a strength. The skill players add versatility. The defense maintains its edge. And eventually, the quarterback position finds stability, whether that's through development or transition. But if even a couple of those key projections miss, then the criticism you're hearing right now is only going to get louder. That's the reality.